place straight away.
Obvious one, but could you just spell out to us what the priorities were, presumably to concentrate on the rescue operation?
Well, certainly from the police perspective, it was getting command straight away, getting a grip on the situation, getting people to the scene to find out exactly what was happening, to coordinate activities between the ambulance, fire and police, and to make sure that all possible action was taken to rescue people, to deal with casualties, to coordinate activity, and to make sure that we could deal with the injured as quickly as possible.
Question at the very back.
Hi, Jonathan Lee here from the Sunday Times. Mr. Paddock, I wonder if you can tell us if there'll be police riding on the trains over the next, well, tomorrow and the next 2 or 3 days, and whether also you'll be bringing officers in to assist the transport police to work in the stations and on the transport system.
Yeah, I mean, British Transport Police do ride the trains all the time, as well as patrolling the mainline stations and the underground, plus our community support officers. They'll all be in high visibility clothes over the next few days. There'll be a lot of activity as we bring more officers on duty, including our search teams, our explosives dogs, and a whole range of different technical aids in order to keep the system safe.
I'll take 2 more questions, one at the front and then one last one at the back.
Mr. Trotter, Derek Tedder from Sky News again. Can you just tell me what precautions are you taking for a chemical incident here? You know, we've heard that you've said this is a standard bomb in your eyes, but what precautions are you taking for any subsequent chemical attack? We have highly developed tactical options to deal with chemical, biological or radiological devices. We've got all the state-of-the-art kit in order to go into the systems wearing that, as have the other emergency services. We do a lot of joint working with all the blue light service, and we're quite convinced that if we do have such an attack, we're capable of dealing with it.
Ken Knight.
Yes, just to confirm, London Fire Brigade, of course, is equipped and trained with such equipment for deployment, and did deploy such equipment, but there is no suggestion, as has been said, that there was any CBRN nature of this terrorist attack, and we didn't have to deploy that equipment at all, but it was available and ready at each of the incidents.
Last question there, please.
Again from the Wall Street Journal. For Mr. Paddock, do you know whether the bombs were left in the tunnels or were on the trains? And also, how are your officers investigating this being organized? Are they staying in their normal units, or are you creating a new structure to deal with this investigation?
It would seem likely that the devices were on the trains, although that is to be confirmed by forensic examination. And we have anti-terrorist squad officers and specialist crime directorate officers who deal with the most serious offences in London deployed to all of these scenes investigating what has taken place.
Okay. That's the end of this conference. Can I just say that while these people have been speaking, Casualty Bureau is now up and running. The telephone number is 0870 156 6344. But what obviously we do not want is an overload of the system again. So could we ask that people ring their family and friends first of all to see if they're safe and well before they contact Casualty Bureau? So the first point of call should be with family and friends on mobiles or via landlines to make sure they are well and safe before they call Casualty Bureau. That would assist us greatly. I don't think we'll be planning any more press conferences here tonight. However, we will keep that under review. It is likely, though, that we will run a press conference tomorrow morning or sometime tomorrow, and that again will be based here at the QE2 Centre. Thank you very much.
So the various leaders of the emergency services, from the Transport Police, Fire Brigade, the Metropolitan Police, London Ambulance, the representatives just breaking away from that meeting. 0870 156 6344. Now that's a casualty line that has been set up. We think there may well be hundreds of people affected by this, but as the gentleman was just saying, please don't phone if you can make the phone call. We think that the mobile phone system is coming back on stream now. It was overloaded for a time today, and many people could not use their mobile phone to make a regular call, either in or out. It's coming back on stream, so check with family members as the advice if you can first. We're running our own service here at Sky News. You can see the ticker running along the bottom of the screen. Many messages, mercifully, saying that we're okay, and just promulgate that out to the family members. But if you are concerned, that's the number to use, the 0870 156 6344. And certainly many people, it fears, will be hearing from their family that they're okay, but they have been in hospital caught up in this. This is one patient at St Mary's Hospital.
I picked up the train, the tube from King's Cross, going to work over at High Street, Kensington. We just pulled out of Edgware Road, and next thing I know, there's a large flash of light. Felt a burning sensation on my hands, put my hands up to my face. I was on the floor by that point. Yeah, I can't recall anything prior to that, any noise, any bang. And as soon as I realised, there'd been an accident, got up, had a look around, saw where the exits were. Train was a complete standstill, lights are out, a lot of smoke in the carriage, not a lot of people moving. There'd been another tube stopped parallel to us in the tunnel. They seemed fine. We were trying to get from our carriage over to their carriage, but couldn't get the doors open. So it's very much a case of waiting in the tube. Next thing we heard, some guys were shouting at the far end of the train that it was fine to get off. They'd be taking people off the back end of the tube.
So that was the one story told from a hospital bed of a young man who has survived this attack today. There are sadly some families, numbering at least 33 people, have been killed in these various incidents today, so their family and friends will be hearing the worst possible news later this afternoon or evening if they don't know already. Now, that number of 33 at least have been killed. We do suspect that number will have to go up. Other sources suggest it's going to be nearer 43, perhaps 45, because we do not know about the Tavistock Place bus bombing. We understand there have been fatalities there, but the authorities cannot confirm how many.
We can hear now from somebody involved with the emergency services. We've got an interview with Dr. Gareth Davis, recorded a little earlier. He is a spokesman for the London Air Ambulance. Let's listen to what he had to say.
Today we mobilised a total of 18 doctors to the incidents that occurred throughout London, where we were able to provide intensive care at the scene of the incident and deal with the injuries that patients had while they were actually trapped in the wreckage of the vehicles and in the tube.
Where did you go first?
My first mobilisation was to Aldgate.
And what did you find there?
We found essentially a lot of walking wounded outside of the tube station. A few people had been brought up out of the tunnel and were lying in the foyer, but we had a lot of seriously injured patients who were still trapped in the wreckage on the train itself in the tunnel.
What sort of condition were they in?
Well, it varied very much between walking wounded with just cuts and scrapes, and obviously people who had very severe injuries who were unconscious.
When you look back on what you've seen today, when you reflect on what you've seen, what's your overall impression? What impressions are you left with of the day?
That's probably a bit early to say. I'm very much focused on how the medical response was actioned, and at the moment I'm just left with that. I'm very sort of happy and proud of the way that the teams responded to the scene.
Did the air ambulance save any lives today?
It wasn't just the air ambulance, it was the 18 doctors were mobilised by the air ambulance, but also in fast response cars. There were approximately 4 doctors and 4 paramedics at each of those incidents, and undoubtedly lives were saved by the teams at the scene.
So how many people?
These are our pictures live from King's Cross, people emerging from their places of work, planning to get home, perhaps leaving a little earlier than normal, anticipating some severe difficulties. Of course, we were hearing that news conference warnings by those involved that it would be a difficult journey home this evening. As we're looking at those pictures, let's just bring you up to date with some of the latest news lines to emerge on this. The US Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice has apparently called our Foreign Secretary Jack Straw to offer assistance following the London blasts, not detailing which or what sort of assistance that might entail. But there has been contact between Condoleezza Rice and Jack Straw on this basis, and also worth marking that the US has raised the terrorist threat level for rail and mass transit systems, but not for airlines following the bomb blasts in London. That is according to a US government official being quoted on the news wires a few moments ago. Also, some information, a message from Pope Benedict XVI to Cardinal Cormac Murphy O'Connor, of course the leader of Roman Catholics in England and Wales. His Holiness is deeply saddened by the news of the terrorist attacks in central London, offers fervent prayers for the victims and for all those who mourn. While he deplores these barbaric acts against humanity, he asks you to convey to the families of the injured his spiritual closeness at this time of grief. So they're the latest news lines to emerge in the last few moments.
London Underground remains closed for the rest of the day, resuming service tomorrow. There were some caveats to that from the London Underground representative we heard from Tim O'Toole, saying maybe some of the ones that run overground might come back on stream tonight, but that's a fluid situation. He said stay tuned to the media for more updates on that. Docklands Light Railway, the DLR, services coming back on stream as of about half an hour ago. Bus services expected to be fully up and running within the caveats of these crime scenes being ignored or bypassed, of course. You can't run a bus past those at the moment. It's from about this afternoon. And national rail services being resumed. Major terminals reopening. Victoria Station, I think, is the one exception to that. There was a quite separate investigation as to whether there was a bomb scare. Now, we heard from Russell Smith of the London Ambulance Service in the press conference. I think he can speak to us now live from that centre. Mr. Smith, thank you for your time this afternoon. How have your staff coped with what they've had to do today?
Well, this has been a difficult day for our staff, a difficult day for our control room staff, who have taken hundreds and hundreds of calls relating to this incident, and of course a particularly difficult day for the technicians and paramedics of the London Ambulance Service who have gone to these scenes and dealt with the traumatic events. They're professionals and they've trained for this, so they have coped with it, but no doubt it's been a difficult day.
The multiple call-out within a time zone of about an hour, was that a problem for you?
We have good staffing at that time of day, so fortunately we were able to cope with the demands placed on us and also supply the normal 999 service to the rest of London.
What can you tell us of the first contact with those who've been injured, which I imagine for many was actually at platform level inside a tube station?
It's hard to say which of the incidents we reached first, but it is fair to say that the public and the patients involved in that incident, and all the incidents in fact, were surprisingly calm. Although there were some terrible injuries and lots of people with minor injuries, people remained calm and evacuated the stations as quickly as they could.
And as far as you know, was it made clear to the paramedics that the areas of emergency were safe to go into? One's thinking, for instance, if you've got to get down on a rail, you want to make sure that the power supply has been cut.
I think early on in any incident there's a lot of confusion, a lot of information coming out, not all of which is reliable. Our paramedics and technicians make dynamic risk assessments when they get to the scene and decide whether it's safe for them to proceed. Certainly if they're proceeding onto the rail, they would ask for the power to be cut before they did so.
And in terms of having to treat people, we heard from a number of sources, particularly I think at the King's Cross incident, that never mind triage, actual operations to save lives were being attempted on the platform very nearby where the incident had happened. Can you confirm that for us?
I can't confirm that, but I can confirm there are a network of doctors who assist the London Ambulance Service in providing treatment of this sort of incident, so it's quite likely that that did happen.
And they would be, what, routinely part of the crew, or they would have been added to the crew to respond to this emergency?
It's a separate network of doctors who support the London Ambulance Service at times like this.
We have been hearing from various members of the emergency services about how in these days you have had to rehearse for an event such as today. Have those rehearsals borne fruit in the sense you feel the operations have gone as well as could be expected under the circumstances?
I think they have. All the ambulance staff and the ambulance officers are trained in major incident plans. Today we've had separate major incidents at each of these sites, so the plans have worked exactly as we've rehearsed them for a long time now in association with our colleagues from the other emergency services. It's just been a multi-site major incident for us.
I suppose one of the problems is getting around London, isn't it? Once there's been some kind of emergency declared, traffic becomes jammed up in one zone. Has that been a particular challenge for your crew today?
Yes, it was. I mean, most of our crews and the managers running the operations got to the incident sites before the roads became congested. But certainly for the ambulance crews, taking patients to hospital has been difficult on some locations.
And in terms of your interface with the hospitals receiving patients, did that work all right?
Yes, it did. We put an officer down to each hospital to liaise directly between the hospital and the ambulance service. That's part of our major incident plan, and that worked well. The hospitals were generally coping. Of course, they've been very busy, and of course, we'd ask people if they don't have a very serious injury or illness at this time to try and avoid going to those hospitals so that they can cope with the extra workload they've had. Additionally, we'd ask people not to dial 999 at this time unless they have a very serious injury or illness.
And have you been able to maintain your regular service for incidents of a medical emergency unrelated to these terrorist attacks?
Yes, we have. As well as running the incidents in central London, we've provided our normal service to the rest of the capital.
All right, well, thank you very much indeed for talking to us. That's Russell Smith from the London Ambulance Service.
It's 4:15 in the afternoon. You're with Sky News. Those who have been fortunate not to be caught up directly in the attacks in London now contemplating how they might begin to get home from central London tonight. We can cross now to our colleague Anna Botting in our newsroom with details on what we know about how transport has been affected so far. Anna, what do you have for us? Hi.
Yeah, Julie, thanks very much indeed. We heard Andy Trotter, didn't we, of British Transport Police saying, please think about your journey now. A travel disruption, as expected, is very widespread. There are currently no tube services at all in London. They've all been suspended, but we heard from that news conference the ambition is to have a service running by tomorrow morning. It won't be on the top side of the Circle line, but it could be that parts of the unaffected services, that's the Jubilee, Northern and Victoria lines, could reopen later on this evening. What about the buses in Zone 1? They'd all been suspended. They are just beginning to resume. It will take a long time, though, to get back to a full operation. A near normal service, though, is running in other parts of the capital. They stress that the buses can take a lot more people. On the overland trains, well, most national rail services had been stopping short of the capital, but I've just taken a call from Network Rail. They say now that only King's Cross remains closed. They have now opened Euston, Paddington, St Pancras, Victoria and Liverpool Street stations. They are empty. Please go there. They're urging people to start travelling home right now. So the flights, they've been unaffected by the chaos. Tour operators are asking people to check in for flights even if they've arrived at the airport late because of their journey to the various airports. Airlines will try to accommodate late arrivals. There had been reports also that Terminal 3 at Heathrow had been evacuated. That was another suspect package. We're going to get a lot of this problem. It's all fine now. It was only a small area that was evacuated. In order to help commuters get home, Transport for London have announced that all riverboat services on the Thames are free. Also, the congestion charge has been suspended for today. People being encouraged to car share where possible. No decision, though, as yet taken on whether the charge will be waived tomorrow as well. But the roads in and out of the capital are very heavy. Expect a lot of congestion. More travel information can be found at the Transport for London interactive service. That's on Sky Active. Press red on your handset and follow the on-screen instructions. And just while we're at it, some other public service messages. Westminster City Council has said that parents will be given information about how to collect your children at the end of the day. Camden schools, we're hearing, are going to be closed all day tomorrow. Police also asking people not to call 999 unless they have a life-threatening emergency. And they've also asked the public not to travel into the capital if they can help it. Once again, that Scotland Yard phone number issued the casualty hotline number for worried relatives. It is 0870 1566 344. If you're watching in an office or you're at home and you need to get somewhere, watch Sky News later. We'll update this throughout the evening.
Anna, thank you very much indeed. That is our live shot at King's Cross, the area around King's Cross which still remains closed off. But as Anna was saying, people being urged to go to those mainline stations if they need to begin their journeys home. We saw some images a little earlier of people leaving their places of work, perhaps leaving a little earlier than normal, anticipating some difficulties on the way back. Whilst we're looking at those pictures, we can also take you live to the QE2 Centre in Westminster and speak to Deputy Assistant Commissioner Brian Paddock. Thanks for giving us some of your time again. We spoke to you a little earlier, Brian Paddock. There were several questions within the news conference that was held in the last hour about the level of security in London at the time of these dreadful attacks. Are you satisfied that it was appropriate?
On the basis of the intelligence and information that we had from all available sources, in conjunction with the government security services, we were convinced that that was an appropriate level of security. I have to reinforce the fact that other than a specific threat to a particular individual or a particular building, we were on the second highest level of alert in London. And so that is a very, very high anti-terrorist security alert status before these incidents happened.
How many officers are at Gleneagles? We know they're now being redeployed to the capital, but give us a sense of the amount of your officers that were actually out of the capital.
We have sent approximately 1,500 officers from London to Scotland to help with the G8 conference. We have 31,000 police officers in London, and we were entirely satisfied that we had enough officers in London, and we are entirely satisfied that we have enough officers to deal with this or any other incident that may happen.
They are now all being brought back, we learn in the last hour. Presumably all leave cancelled for those who are away. What sense of the police operation can you give us at the moment?
Well, unfortunately, I've been in press conferences and so forth. I don't have the up-to-date position on that.
But what would be normal procedure? That's questionable in itself. But what would be the procedure which was pre-arranged for this?
I'm sorry, I've just lost the sound from you.
Sorry, Brian Paddock, can you hear me now, Deputy Assistant Commissioner?
Ahead.
Hi. I just wonder what had been agreed in emergency contingency plans for this. Presumably leave is cancelled, is it?
Leave was cancelled in any event because of the G8 conference, and therefore, as I say, we have sufficient officers on duty to deal with these incidents and with any other incident that may come our way.
What happens next in terms of the way that you're coordinating the operation in the next few hours? Clearly, we're almost over that period whereby the incident has struck and people have had to deal with the emergency situation. Where are we now with this?
Well, clearly it is a case of securing the scenes where these incidents have happened to ensure that we secure all the forensic evidence that is necessary to try and track down the perpetrators of these atrocities. The next stage after that will be to return London to normality as quickly as possible.
And how soon is that achievable, do you think?
Well, again, it depends on the extent and nature of the damage and where that damage is. Clearly, the underground system, parts of the underground system are going to be out of action for some considerable period of time. But in terms of above ground, we hope to return London to normality very quickly. And clearly, part of that is going to be having large numbers of police officers out on the streets to reassure the public.
And in terms of information that the public may have for you, clearly you have hundreds of potential witnesses, presumably, or people who can simply comment on the timings of events. For those people who want to come forward and talk to the police, is there a way by which they can do it?
At this stage, we didn't want to confuse things in terms of confusing the Casualty Bureau telephone number with the information line that people can phone in if they have information in connection with who may have carried out these attacks. And so at this stage we are just giving out the Casualty Bureau number, which your viewers will already have. We will very shortly issue the anti-terrorist hotline number where people can phone in to give information about what they have seen, and if they stay tuned, we will have that number to them as soon as we possibly can.
And in terms of the forensic work going on at the scenes of these blasts, everybody, of course, will be impatient for some sort of information or detail about the nature of these attacks. How soon can we expect some more information?
Well, there is a balance to be achieved. Clearly, it's important for people to have as much information about what has taken place as possible. On the other hand, we do not want to give away too much information that may interfere with the investigation, that may interfere with bringing people to justice. And therefore, we will give as much information as we can that does not impede the investigation.
Deputy Assistant Commissioner Brian Paddock, thank you very much indeed for giving us your time this afternoon. Thank you.
Well, these are extraordinary circumstances and an extraordinary day for Londoners and people who work in the city. Robert Nisbet is down in the area adjacent to King's Cross Station. And Robert, I imagine some people trying to get home.
Indeed, many thousands, Martin, trying to get home. There's a very strange atmosphere here. It's very, very quiet, despite the fact that there are hundreds of people on the street, just gradually walking where they're allowed to. There are a number of people, obviously commuters who live in London, but also visitors to the city, including Graham from York, who came down early this morning.
That's right.
When did you come down?
Actually, my train actually arrived at 8:15, and I actually used the tube to go through to actually Euston Square, and everything was very quiet then. But as we walked into our conference started, so one or two came in told us what had happened, and so we'd basically been on hold all day, waiting to see whether trains are opening. There's just been very little information getting back through.
So are you trying to get back to York tonight?
Absolutely. Well, we're trying to. Either that, we're going to be sleeping on the streets, which would be a novel idea, I suppose.
So what are you trying to do? I mean, what are your plans at the moment?
Well, at the moment, we have a reservation in a hotel. We're going to see whether or not the station's going to open. And again, we're getting no information from that. We did hear earlier on that it was opened after Euston Station had opened. But again, nothing's happened yet.
It appears that most of the mainline stations, apart from King's Cross, have now opened. How would you describe the atmosphere here? It is quite eerie, isn't it?
It's very surreal. It's very quiet. Everyone's very quiet. They're going around their daily business, but not saying very much. And really just probably worried about trying to get home, as we all are. And if you haven't been able to communicate with anyone because the networks have gone down and so forth. And so, yes, it is very quiet. It's bizarre, really strange.
Well, good luck in your efforts to get home this evening.
Much.
Thanks very much indeed, Graham. So many stories like that, people around King's Cross trying to work their way back. Of course, this is the one mainline station that hasn't reopened, and I'm sure that this stream of commuters will be continuing for many hours to come.
OK, Robert, but meanwhile, you say there's a calm there. People obviously having absorbed the terrible news of what's happened this morning, now resigned to trying to go about things in a fairly orderly fashion, as far as you can see from your vantage point.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's quite an eerie atmosphere, really. People are a lot of people talking on their mobile phones. A lot of people just looking quite stunned by it all, as well as trying to deal with the practicalities of just trying to get home. Obviously, this has been exacerbated by the fact that many of the mobile phone networks just seized up due to the weight of demand. So a lot of people obviously trying to tell their friends and families that they're okay and that they are on their way home. But it's going to be a long journey for a lot of people here tonight.
OK, Robert, back with you later on. We can talk to another gentleman who took part in the press conference a little while ago, and that is Tim O'Toole from London Underground, as we watch more pictures from our Skycopter. I think it's just coming back from a refuelling stop and back into the centre of London again. Mr O'Toole, thank you for joining us here on Sky News. And let me just ask you once again, for people who are just tuning our way as we get towards that tea time period of the day, to refresh our minds as to exactly what took place on the Tube network this morning.
Well, I'd be happy to, but first let me please say to all of my passengers and to the loved ones of people who were injured today how sorry we are, and give our condolences and our concern. Early this morning we got the report of a power outage on the Underground. Incidents on the Underground always manifest themselves that way because of the safety devices that immediately take off traction current whenever there's a problem. We then had a report of a derailed train at Edgware Road, and we didn't initially understand that there was a bomb had gone off. But then once we had word of the further incident on the Piccadilly Line train and then at Aldgate, we ordered a code amber moving all trains into platforms so that we could move people off the network while we stabilized the situation.
The reports that came out in that early confusion of some kind of power surge, in the light of what we know now, were they wrong?
Oh yes, they were wrong. They came out because, as I said, the way a problem on the Underground first manifests itself is the power is shut off, and because the power was withdrawn across the top of the Circle Line, there was the perception that a lot of breakers had fired, and that most often occurs because of a power surge. So people started repeating that story. But no, there was no power surge, and indeed, the electrical system of the underground is completely intact now and would allow us to run a full service.
Well, let me ask you about that. How quickly, notwithstanding you're going to have to stay clear, I appreciate, of crime scenes, the scenes where these explosions took place, and no doubt the adjacent stations, how quickly might you be able to use the rest of the tube network?
Well, the first thing we have to do is to inspect every single train and every part of every single train on the London Underground system before we do anything. Then we're going to move those trains to depots and prepare ourselves for further service. Our ambition is to run a near complete service in the morning. If we are able to, we will institute service this evening on unaffected lines, such as the Jubilee line and the Northern line, but we don't know if that will be possible, and we would not want people to count on that. Instead, we want people to check the new services to determine what services will be available. We hope to run the entire network with the exception, as you say, of those parts impaired by the crime scene, but that will mean we won't have a Circle Line service, and will also mean that at best we would be running shuttles on either end of the Piccadilly line.
What about your staff? One would quite imagine if some would feel, perhaps if they were involved on the periphery of events today, that they might need some time to reacclimatise to getting down into a tube tunnel once again. They may choose not to come to work tomorrow.
The London Underground staff are brilliant. They always respond in times of emergency, and I expect they will do this time as well. Indeed, throughout the day, I've been getting one complimentary story after another about the behavior of our staff in handling this emergency. Because you must keep in mind, when this first happened, the only ones to deal with it were London Underground staff. They dealt with it calmly, the passengers were calm, there was no panic. It was really a brilliant performance.
We are hearing the first eyewitness accounts of those who perhaps are suffering mercifully minor injuries in hospital, who now feel able to tell their story. Are you happy from what you've heard that the procedures in an emergency such as this, when there is a power outage in a tunnel and a lot of people crammed into one tube train need to get out, that the information flow was right, that your staff knew how to lead people out of trains, that the power wasn't cut off until trains got into stations where that was feasible?
Well, I think the record will obviously be examined, and there are going to be problems with people who are on the incident trains who are desperate for help immediately, and when a minute seems like 15 minutes. But if you look at the rest of the network, and you consider that it was rush hour, and that we moved tens upon tens of thousands of people out without an incident, I think that's what that tells you, is the procedures are in place. Indeed, I would point out that we ran a live exercise just 2 weeks ago at Tower Hill Station. We do this regularly with our staff. We are constantly practicing. Because of the history of London Underground, we have a very elaborate and sophisticated operating plan for dealing with emergencies.
And just to reaffirm for people who may be joining our coverage now, as far as you're aware, neither London Underground nor any of the official services you liaise with, like the Met Police or your own Transport Police, had any indication that such an outcome was going to come about today?
We certainly had no indication, and I've got no information from any of the other services that they had any indication.
Tim O'Toole, thank you very much indeed for your time. We must let you get back to your office and continue with trying to re-establish services as soon as is practical.
Thank you.
Well, these images that you've been watching, some of those that we've received from a viewer from their mobile phone inside one of the train carriages this morning. A short time ago we heard from eyewitness Gracia Sormigos. She was on her way to work on the tube when one of the bombs exploded, and she has given us a graphic account of the scene in which she found herself in the carriage of her train.
It was terrific, you know. It was just like boom, and I could feel like as if I'm being electrocuted, you know. And I shook like mad up and down the chair where I was. And then when I opened my eyes, I saw this guy with his leg on top of my left leg, you know. And it was dropped, but his leg was just chopped up there, and his bone was sticking out. And, you know, yeah.
You're
still
okay?
on my leg, yeah, but I was okay. Then, but, you know, I just lifted my right leg up, and then out of the blue I saw another guy just, you know, thump on this guy whose leg is already out. then I managed to somehow, push him a little bit and tell him something that, just keep on talking. But then I managed to lift my leg up and I sat on the chair. And then another guy on my left was badly, cut here because he banged his head on the steel where he was sitting near the aisle. And then I saw another guy, when the light was on, when help came, and maybe, from the underground station stuff.
How long were you trapped before help came?
Oh, I just couldn't remember. But the lady who was sitting next to me was saying it's 9:20 in the morning already,
What time did you get out?
I got on Turnpike Lane station, and it was absolutely packed. And by the time we got at King's Cross, then people got off and on again, but I managed to sit down. And then a few minutes later, leaving the King's Cross station, and the thing happened. What happened? What happened? I just hear this bang, big bang, and then my body just shook, and as if I am inside an oven,
As if you're
just
inside
like
an oven?
electrocuted, yeah.
The words there of Gracia Sormigos speaking to us a little earlier. Our Sky helicopter is above the City of London. Familiar, even though new landmarks of the Gherkin, of course, circling around this area which has been so badly affected in this morning's attacks. Our Sky helicopter was looking at some of the images, and earlier on today, right down at Aldgate Station, has been kept back from some of the scenes a little later in the day. We're just getting news that the Union flag is now flying over Buckingham Palace at half-mast at the Queen's request, in a mark of respect for those who've died and who've been injured in the bombings in London today. That is the latest news that we have from the palace. As we can see on screen also, we received comment earlier today from Ken Livingstone before he flew back from the celebrations in Singapore. He called what happened today in London mass murder. We'll stay with those images from our Sky News helicopter. Alongside me in the studio is Jeff Charlton. He's a disaster expert, has given advice before on disaster management. Jeff, we're into that phase now. We've had some communications from those involved. We're now seeing people trying to get home in quite a sort of eerie silence, as one of our correspondents was noting, a sort of sense of calm amongst those who are just determined to deal with it and move on. But it shouldn't be underestimated, the shock that people will feel, not necessarily in the first hours of this.
I think the shock that people starts to accumulate as they talk with people and they start to relive their experiences. There's been thoughts in the past that people should relive their experiences, and that's been that philosophy's maybe changed now, and maybe people should keep it to themselves or talk. There's no set rule now, as people had decided that it should be talks with psychiatrists or whatever, and just generally speak about their experiences. I think people have looked at the vulnerability in London and their vulnerability today trying to get home. The government have published plans. They haven't published the actual plan, but they certainly have published their own plans and ideas for evacuating London. I'm surprised that some of this hasn't been used today to assist people in getting home. And certainly some of the plans revolved around some of the mainline stations. And now we've seen that a mainline station's closed from, although a dreadful bomb, but a minor bomb in reality of terms of what could have been with chemical or biological.
But they have stressed that other mainline stations, and including some platforms at King's Cross, have been reopened. They're already talking about getting some of the underground services back and running, maybe even as early as tomorrow.
Absolutely.
So presumably that is all part of the reassurance for those people who must be thinking, good heavens, at what point do I ever decide to go back on a tube train in London ever again?
Well, that's a decision that's going to be made individually. But I think what's interesting from the reports that we've heard earlier was that some of the mainline stations are empty, and that people don't know that they're running. Now that seems to be a very poor communications exercise in London, and how people will actually find this information out, I don't know.
OK, Jeff, for the moment, thank you very much indeed.
The helicopter's actually still over the City of London, but just zooming the camera in as it makes the journey. I think it's coming westwards to Buckingham Palace, and we can see that the flag is at the Union flag is at half-mast. That is going to be lowered as a mark of respect to those who have died. We know about 33 people who have lost their lives in this series of what the government are now calling terror attacks around London today. 4 incidents, 3 in the tube system, 1 in a London bus that was blown to bits, the upper story completely destroyed. And it's feared from other sources there may be as many as a dozen more deaths to learn about in that incident. The capital, though, trying to get back to some kind of normality this evening in terms of restoring the ability for those workers who've come into the capital, by far most of them, of course, who are not affected in this, who weren't caught up in it, although it did happen at rush hour, that they have had a day when no doubt they've been as concerned as everyone else to try and communicate with their loved ones, to reassure them that things are okay with them. Messages difficult to get out of central London for a good deal of time as the phone system was diverted to emergency workers only. A preference system came in and the mobile phone networks were deployed to aid emergency workers only for a period of time. That, of course, understandably causing additional alarm for some family members, but we imagine that they are restoring these things to normal now. There may be a tricky journey home. The mainline stations are now open as we get a picture of Tower Bridge and that familiar scene from the eastern side of the City of London, or just south of the Thames there, looking northwest or thereabouts, I suppose, in that particular part of the city. More reports, of course, from round there before. But let's now talk to Ken Knight, who is from the London Fire Service, also involved in the emergency calls that came out. And we heard from Mr. Knight, amongst others, at the press conference a little while ago. Mr. Knight, thank you for waiting for us. Just remind us, in terms of a call to duty for your staff, how did they able to respond? How were they able to help?
Well, London firefighters were deployed to a call to the underground, a possible explosion, possible fire, and it quickly escalated, as we saw, 4 simultaneous incidents to an emergency of a greater magnitude. And so it's treated at a very early stage of a potential terrorist attack, and the planning and training and preparation for such an attack, certainly since 9/11, came into effect today. And firefighters, along with all the other emergency service workers, worked magnificently. We did, of course, deploy crews as though it could have been a chemical and biological attack, and that's why you saw pictures of firefighters in chemical protection suits. And once we'd identified that wasn't the case, it was conventional but tragic terrorist attack, they were deployed for rescue and potential fire in the underground and indeed on the bus.
Now, just remind us of the rehearsals you've had to do for the very particular nature, the very particular skills, I would imagine, that would have to be deployed when people have been injured by an explosive device in the relatively small space of a London tube train.
Yes, very much so. And we've worked very hard, not only with the emergency services I mentioned, but also with people like London Underground that have a set procedure. For example, the trains were immediately moved to the stations, the railway stations, at a very early stage. So there wasn't long evacuation for the whole of the network throughout the tunnels, but actually from railway stations, which made it so much easier. There weren't other people trapped underground, and we could concentrate on those activities where the bombs had occurred. And it was very harrowing, of course, harrowing for everyone, emergency service workers as well as the public. But the public as well responded well today in a cool and calm fashion, and just helped each other and evacuated and did what we needed to do. And I'm delighted that the plan did work well, the preparation worked well, and we maintain on high alert and vigilant and ensure that the capital remains safe.
And was it the case, as has been described by some people, particularly some eyewitnesses, that as they were trying to get out of a station which was confused, certainly damaged, there were injured people around, your officers were having to head down the stairs or down whatever means there were to go down to help more people?
Well, of course, and that's the nature of the role of the fire brigade. It's the nature of the role that we weren't entirely sure whether there was a fire down there or whether there was people that was trapped in smoke as well as those that were initially injured. And I'm pleased to say that wasn't the case, but our worst case assessment needed to be made in the first instance in order that the fire service rescuers and the others could be part of the solution, not part of the problem. But immediately it became clear what the tragedy unfolded was, and they all worked extremely well and have actually proved the effectiveness of the new role that we have to play for such eventualities.
And the multiple call-out within quite a short time frame, was that a problem for you?
No, it wasn't. We have a very large and a regional fire control that worked well and continue to maintain normal operations elsewhere in London. We moved fire engines across London to fill gaps and to fill holes. We alerted other fire brigades in the UK in case it was a much worse and an escalating situation. I'm grateful for them being on alert, but we didn't have to deploy them into the incidents themselves. So that plan as well was very much part of the preparedness of the reality today.
I mean, one of the pure practicalities, one would imagine, you didn't know either as commanders at the office in control rooms or actual firefighters on the ground when it was over, did you?
No.
I mean, by mid-morning there could have been more blasts to happen.
And we were preparing for that. We were keeping a very careful eye on that, regular meetings with the other services and of course with the police, and indeed even now remain on high alert. So we don't assume that that means that that's the terrorist attack that is over, that there may not be other future eventualities. We will maintain that high level of alert, as will all of the other emergency services.
Now, without giving any operational confidences, this business about knowing whether the emergency zone was safe to enter, the threat of a chemical attack, for instance, tell us about that and tell us about the sort of equipment you use to establish whether or not it's safe for your firefighters to go into the zone.
Well, I won't go into the whole of that detail for the obvious reasons, but we do assume the worst case, of course. And here in London, we have a joint agency team of the police and the ambulance service and ourselves that's able to go in with detection equipment, to go in with protective equipment in order to do that very early reconnaissance in order that we can deploy crews safely after that assessment has been made. And that's why you saw that early high level of protection being used, even though subsequently we were able to downgrade that to firefighting and rescue operations. I was going to say normal. Nothing is normal in today's scenes, and I think it would have been extremely harrowing for all of those involved. But they did perform well and came up to the expectation today that I think London expects of London Fire Brigade and will continue to give.
And Mr. Knight, have you been able to offer a regular service for other fire emergencies for the rest of the capital city throughout the day?
Yes, we actually still had something like 100 frontline crews that were available, but we were put on high alert, and of course we increased security ourselves. But we were able to maintain the level of service to London and yet maintain this level of attention to these sites. And that was part of the plan. We did stop other activities in order to put people into operational use that perhaps were in training and so on. But we didn't have to invoke that, and that was fine.
And you can move forward into... Sorry, just so you...
I just lost you for a minute, I'm sorry.
That's quite all right, just the earpiece falling out there. Just a final thought, you can move forward now and provide as proficient a cover as you normally would for this evening, overnight and into tomorrow?
Yes, we can. So we now have fresh crews arriving at the change of the shift tonight, and they will maintain the preparedness exactly as today's crews perform well. And as I've said, and will continue in the future. And after this event, we will have a look closely at it, look at the detail of it, and how we'll continue to maintain that preparedness and yet improve it if at all we can.
If I can ask you about the interface between yourselves and the paramedics. I know this is a sort of, in some ways, a sensitive issue, because I seem to remember discussing it quite a lot during the recent build-up to the various strikes and so on, and exactly the role of a firefighter. But if they are first on scene, it may be that they need to respond to the human needs of reassurance and calming people down. That's their number one task, rather than actually fighting a fire.
Yes, and they do that normally as well, of course. So, I mean, it would just cast your mind into normal rescue and firefighting operations from a road traffic accident to a fire. So the firefighters are trained just for that eventuality. They're very good with people, as you know, and the men and women of London Fire Brigade are able to do that on the day-to-day work, and have come through that again today. And I think they will themselves need some support, because we will need to put some support mechanism to them to ensure that we support them, having seen some of these scenes today, and we'll continue to do that. But I know they'll be back on duty tomorrow and available to respond in exactly the same way as they did today.
One doesn't want to belittle what they've faced, though, nor do I want to try and suggest that they're not prepared for it. But I would imagine that going from rehearsal to actually going through an emergency like this, with all the trauma to members of the public that entails, that may have unforeseen consequences on your staff.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And that's why we have put already put in support mechanisms for such firefighters who will have seen those scenes that you can't replicate. You can't replicate in training.
All right. Ken Knight, thank you very much indeed for your time, and we wish you and your officers well for the coming hours.
Thank you very much.
We're joined now from Central London by the Shadow Home Secretary, David Davis. Good afternoon to you, Mr Davis. We heard you responding to the Home Secretary a little earlier in the House of Commons, but perhaps you could just outline your thoughts this afternoon for us.
Well, clearly our thoughts first go to the victims and their families and friends. Condolences and prayers to all of them, and also to say how well it looks as though the emergency services are dealing with this all. But at the end of the day, this clearly is an attack that got right by our security services. This can happen in a civilized society. It can happen only too easily, and it's clearly a very calculated, evil attempt to kill as many people as possible and do as much harm to people as possible. And that's what we have to calculate around.
Are you surprised that it seems that the capital wasn't on its highest state of alert, given that we are hosting the G8 summit in this country at the moment?
Well, what that tells you is that this is a group that we didn't know were at work, or at least that we're completely unaware of this activity. Of course, I mean, with hindsight, one can see that this was an attempt to hit a big target, London, at a time when two things were in place. One, that we were in the eyes of the world because of G8, and two, that a good deal of our security focus was quite properly aimed at Gleneagles, at protecting Gleneagles from all the possible threats that might apply there. So, of course, it is a bit surprising the security status was low, but what it implies, as I say, is that these people were completely undetected.
But it seems that you also imply that the security of the capital was compromised by the fact that so much attention had been focused at Gleneagles.
Well, I don't know about that. I don't know about compromised. What is the case is that there is a limit to what you can do to defend a target as big as London, the entire London Underground. Evidently, I mean, there's a limited amount of resources. You have to apply them to the highest risk areas. Clearly, it would be unsurprising, as we've actually seen on televisions, if a lot of our police resources were focused on Gleneagles at the moment, and the terrorists presumably made use of that, and presumably also made use of it in the knowledge that the world's television and the world's news was focused on Britain at this point in time. Now, the real issue is, however, the extent that they got through without anybody detecting this was coming up. I mean, we've been hearing it from experts saying that there was no increase in terrorist traffic. There's no advance warning of any sort here. There have been lots of rumours about it, and that's where the breakdowns occurred. But I have to say, in an open and free society, it is not possible to be 100% sure you're going to catch every attempted terrorist incident. I'm afraid that is a reality of the modern world.
Therefore, how do people, I mean, it is very early hours yet, but how do people living and working in the capital and those who are witnessing it from elsewhere around the UK start to sort of grapple with this, really, in terms of whether they think they'll ever use a tube again, or whether they'll indeed think twice about coming to the capital in the coming months. It's going to be a difficult time indeed, presumably.
Oh, I'm not so sure. I think people are very resilient and realistic about this sort of thing. Of course, we'll have to have a review of what happened, a review of how the security services handled it, a review of how the emergency services responded. All of those things need to be looked at. I've asked the Home Secretary if he or the Prime Minister will come and make us to the House on Monday when they've had a bit more time to gather the information and intelligence together, and then we can make a realistic and sensible assessment of what's gone on. But at the moment, my primary concern is that from the terrorist point of view, one of their actions is to try to unsettle, to break the morale of countries like ours and to divide us. Just as they did in Madrid, they attacked during a general election in order to create a division in Spanish society. I'm very anxious that we show them a united front, that we don't actually turn on ourselves, that we show them a united front. Of course we have to have the review later, but today, frankly, my criticism is reserved solely for the evil people who carried out this very calculated, very malicious attack.
We're just hearing, David Davis, that the Union flag will be flown at half-mast on all government buildings tomorrow. I'm sure that's something you'd wholeheartedly support in the wake of what we've seen today.
That's entirely proper, and as it should be, and as I started out by saying, our thoughts and prayers with the families and friends of those who were hurt today.
David Davis, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
And if you fear your family member may be amongst the injured or those who've lost their lives today, there is an emergency service number, a casualty number. Now, the services are saying, please don't use this. If there's any other means of just reassuring yourself, if there's any other phone call you can make, 0870 156 6344. That's 0870 156 6344. That is the casualty emergency number, which the emergency service is just asking that we should just show, or at least appeal to you that we should just show some sensitivity in using only if you really have no other means of trying to track down whether your family members have been caught up in these explosions this morning. Looking at pictures, I believe that's the Battersea helipad, isn't it? The heliport that's used, and some people, I think, just using that as a regular flight. I would imagine our helicopter just over that part of London at the moment. The capital trying to get people home tonight. Many of the mainline stations are open.
Yep, you can have a chat to me.
The problem will be, of course, getting from the various parts of various parts of the city into the mainline stations. Actually, on board the chopper, let's get the very latest from this vantage point, is Sarah Hughes. Sarah, bring us up to speed on what you're hearing.
Well, we've been flying over London for the past half hour now. The roads headed out of London are completely gridlocked. Obviously, roads in central London are closed off. The entire tube network has been suspended. Buses in Zone 1 are suspended as well, so there's no travel around central London at all, apart from people moving on foot. And out of London, all of those roads, those trunk roads going out of London, are completely gridlocked at the moment. And obviously that's only going to get worse as we move into rush hour later on this evening.
And Sarah, well, thank you for that. I know you're going to keep the camera trained on the various bits of London to try and understand that traffic conditions as we look back again at the heliport down there at Battersea. I think the main arterial roads, you're saying a little bit further out, we're hearing from the M25, the M4 as well, these kind of areas having difficulty tonight. John O'Connor is actually with us at Sky Centre, has been with us throughout the day here. Now, where does the police focus in now, John? We've got the conflicting aspirations, I suppose, of making things safe as far as humanly possible, and yet wanting to get back to normal as quickly as possible.
And also, they want to get their scenes of crimes officers into the at least 7 crime scenes, so they can secure as much evidence as they possibly can. What I suspect that they'll do is to have a crime manager in charge of each crime scene, and then examine it as it is in situ at the moment, find out what they can. So what they're going to know, want to know is what kind of explosive it was, what sort of detonators were used, how are they triggered, and so forth. And once they've done that, then the debris will be taken probably down to Woolwich Arsenal, somewhere down. That's the normal location where it's taken, where it can be sifted through in a more scientific environment by scientific officers. So that's what the investigators will be doing. Quite clearly, the senior uniformed police officers will be looking to make sure that London is as safe as it possibly can be, and of course they're going to have to prepare themselves to make sure this isn't the preamble to a series of these terrorist attacks, which is going to be the big worry at the moment.
Well, I guess that looks to the intelligence guys, does it? That they've got to try and tap into, with ever greater energy, what sources they have to find out, was this the one-off, was this the one day, is that the extent of it, or is there more to come?
I think they aren't going to know that until events unfold, because it seems to me that this type of terrorism which we're facing now can strike almost at will, you know, in a major city centre like London. It's very worrying that there haven't been, or apparently haven't been, any tip-offs, any leaks, any information coming out which would lead maybe to putting the security of London on a higher level. That clearly hasn't happened, and I suspect it's one of the things that's worrying the authorities. Because
This will dismay the Met, won't they? Because they've talked about their relationship with the intelligence services. It's been successful, and Sir John Stevens said, "We've stopped things happening."
Well,
that was his his claim.
Yeah, I know. And if you read in this morning's Guardian, one of